Welcome to Mastering Life's Adventures, an educational podcast about tapping into your true self, the soul, the substance of your life, to discover what life's ups and downs are really about, and how to have a greater sense of purpose, peace, joy, and fulfillment. I am Dr. Judith Holder, your host, coach, psychologist, fellow seeker who enjoys diving into the connections between spirituality, psychology, wellness, and your everyday life's adventures. All preparing and polishing you like the facets of a magnificent diamond to be your best self. If you're craving more from your life, you are in the right place. Come, let's journey together and transforming what you know into who you really are. Mastering Life's Adventures begins now.
Hi, I'm back with another key to soul progress. And I think you'll probably be surprised. I was thinking about a more powerful key, and not to say the other keys are not powerful, but certainly they are. But I think it's a concept that we sometimes think in different ways, but may not be always on target. And that is the key of the will of God. I want to explore how aligning with this principle is central to soul progress. The will of God. Often misunderstood. Many see it as an external force that controls us, but in reality, it's the divine flow that guides us towards our highest purpose and potential. I remember growing up and they say the will of God is good. The will of God is good. But do we really understand what that means? There's a goodness that comes from the principles and the law of the will of God. I've talked about spiritual laws in the past, and what I want to focus on today is this whole notion of the will of God. Not only do people see it from an external control, but in reality, it's a divine flow that guides towards our highest, as I mentioned before, our highest attunement to understand what the will of God is, and the ability to sometimes we've got to surrender our will to the higher will of God's will. I know that can be challenging because you think your will is God's will, but they actually can be two different things. What our desires are may not be in alignment with God's will for a greater divine plan that we are trying to be aware of each and every day in our interactions, jobs, and people we come in contact with. The will of God is not a distant or rigid mandate or decree. It's a principle that, when understood and embraced, leads us to a deeper connection with our true purpose and understanding that there are greater laws that exist in the universe than the ones that we see right in front of us. So I'm going to introduce kind of I like acronyms. And this one that I thought would be nice is LIFE. And life is what we're focused around, and that's what the will of God is. What is the best life? The higher purpose, the higher reasoning, or God's will wants for us and each one of us. And we all have divine plans, even though we may not feel like we do or we don't know what they are. So LIFE is what I'm going to use as my acronym to help you understand how to align with the will of God. Let's begin by looking at a story. And the story that I was thinking about was kind of a historical figure who exemplifies devotion to the principles and integrity of the will of God. That was Sir Thomas More. Some of you may be familiar with Sir Thomas More, some of you may not be. So let me give you a quick overview of Sir Thomas More. He was an English lawyer, philosopher, and statesman, known for his unwavering commitment to his principles. And his first principle was God first, then king, then family. More's life was a shining example of this, especially when faced with tremendous external pressure. As the Chancellor of England, More, and he was the Chancellor of England, And More was an influential figure during that time in the court of King Henry VIII. And the king sought to break from the Catholic Church, as maybe some of you know the history here, and to establish the Church of England, which More could not support. And though he was loyal to the king, very loyal to the king, More could not accept the king's claim as the supreme religious authority in England. Despite immense pressure, More chose to remain true to his faith, serving God first and the principles of God. And his consciousness was important to him, to be in alignment with that, and his moral conviction, or should I say moral convictions. And even in the face of threat of death, which ultimately Sir Thomas More was executed for refusing to endorse the king's actions to maintain his own integrity until the end, he was persecuted and beheaded. This history, this story, teaches us a profound lesson about the will of God. Living in alignment with divine will sometimes means standing firm on your beliefs and principles. He prayed, asked for guidance, and is willing to go with his connection, his grand connection that he had with his Creator, regardless of the consequences. Sir Thomas More's commitment to living with integrity and devotion to his Creator, I think, offers a clear example of how aligning with divine will can require great courage and sacrifice. And when we know that there is something greater that exists, and the reason why we are holding to those principles, because he had a firm conviction and awareness that God's will is what was first and foremost in his mind. And what the king wanted of him was of the human will, was the human desire. The human be able to break away and he become the king of the church so he could do what he wanted to do, which to have a marriage, another marriage. But Sir Thomas More said, that is not in keeping with God's plan, and God is supreme over man. With that story in mind, let's break down the will of God using the helpful acronym of life. And this is how I thought about it. The L is for love. Sir Thomas More loved God more than he loved himself. He wanted to be sure that he was doing God's will and not man's will. Divine will is rooted in the highest and most unconventional form of love. It's not about rigid rules, and it's not about understanding what other people are saying they want out of their desires, but understanding that our actions should be guided by love. That takes meditation, contemplation, something I talked about in 2 episodes ago. The will of God always begins with love. You love God more than you love yourself. You love God and you want to do God's will because you know it honors God through you in the ways in which you behave and act. Divine will is rooted in the highest and most unconventional form of love. Sometimes it is not about rigid rules. It's about understanding that others' actions should be guided by love for ourselves as well as for other individuals. When we are in alignment with the will of God, we live with compassion and kindness at the core. Living with an understanding that my interactions with individuals around me first begins with my understanding of God's love in my life and how I honor that love. And then it extends to understanding what this other individual is asking, or whether you can or can't do it. because that hits the next aspect of life, integrity. When we talk about integrity, what I mean by that is that the will of God calls us to live with honesty and authenticity, just as Sir Thomas More did. Integrity means standing by your principles, no matter how difficult it may be. It's about being true to yourself and your values, even when the world around you pressures you to compromise or conform. And when we align with divine will, we make choices that reflect our highest truths and deepest values. That's where studying and understanding our spiritual path of what is the discernment, and I've used this word before, discerning what is true and on the path of the will of God and what is outside of the will of God. And you only know those things by your willingness to study, to reflect, to contemplate about this. So the next is F of life, which stands for flow. The will of God invites us to live in alignment with the natural flow of life. It is not about fighting against the current, but trusting that the universe has a higher plan for us. And when we allow ourselves to flow with divine will, life becomes easier, more harmonious, and filled with purpose. Doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges, and they may arise, but there's a sense of peace in knowing that we are following in the path of divine guidance. Whatever else is happening around you, chaos, confusion, doubt, and uncertainty, there's an inner conviction, an inner knowing that you're in the flow of the will of God. It's about evolution. And the will of God leads us to constantly evolve, grow, and expand spiritually. Through aligning with divine will, we experience true transformation, moving beyond our limitations and stepping into our highest potential each and every day. How are we stepping into our highest potential? How are we doing things that are in the will of God? How are we asking our soul, is this an attunement with God's will for my life this day, this week, this month, this year, decade? We're always, through discernment, trying to spot out and have a greater appreciation for God's will and how we want to honor that. And that's where sometimes we evolve from. We're moving from our limitations and stepping into the higher expansiveness, the boundlessness of what God is and God's will. It's about personal growth, spiritual awareness, and knowing that we're always guided by our Creator, our Atman, the I Am Presence, always being in step and in attunement with how what we knew a month ago may evolve to having greater information that helps us understand the will of God. When we remember life, which is the qualities of love, integrity, being in the flow, and evolving in our understanding of the will of God, we have a clear framework then, I believe, to how we can stay in alignment with God's will and be guided on our soul's journey, mastering certain experiences that come our way in life. A quality of the will of God helps us make decisions that align with divine guidance and propels us toward the path of growth. And that's why we're on planet Earth, is to grow. We may be thinking why integrity is such a key. It illustrates that when we live with integrity, and each of us has to contemplate what that looks like in our life and how we want to live with integrity, we then move ourselves automatically aligning with the will of God. Integrity is a cornerstone for spiritual progress. Because integrity gives us a part of harmony. And a part of harmony and peace allows us to be in listening grace. And when we can be in listening grace, it really actually attunes us to our soul's promptings and guides us in what we may need to do. So we walk by faith, not by sight. By faith, because we are listening, and we've now have fine-tuned that integrity of listening to what is the right thing for me to do here? What is the highest thing for me to do in this situation? How can I make the better decision that will be in honor of not only myself, but other individuals that are involved in making this decision? Something to think about integrity. I think integrity is such a fabulous word because it opens the door for so many positive things in our life. When we are trying to do the will of God and be authentic with our values and connecting to our soul, we sometimes have difficult decisions that we've got to make about different various things in our life. They can be small, it can be great, but they can be difficult decisions. And you might be torn between doing what is easiest and most comfortable versus doing what's in alignment with your higher principles. But your gut tells you really need to do it this way, not the easy way. And that's the struggle. That's the point of learning. And this is where integrity comes into play. Living with integrity means choosing what is true, even when it requires sacrifice or discomfort. So I find myself always asking, is this true? Is this what I need to do here, Lord? How do I need to do this in a different way? What is it that I'm seeing and that I'm not seeing in order to make the best choice or the best decision? And then be quiet and then listen to my own inner promptings. It's important to remember that integrity isn't just about moral character. It is about being honest with ourselves. Are we living in alignment with our divine truth? Are we acting in a way that reflects our soul's highest calling? And when we answer these questions with honesty, we unlock the full power of divine will in our lives. As we consider the importance of integrity and devotion to the divine will, let's reflect on the challenges that can arise. And the greatest challenge in aligning with the will of God is resistance of the ego persona. The ego wants control, certainty, and immediate gratification, whereas the will of God requires trust, patience, and sometimes the courage to let go of control and look at the longer game, the longer perspective, not immediate gratification. Like Sir Thomas More, we may face moments when standing for our principles requires great personal sacrifice. And the world often pulls us in different directions, tempting us to follow easier paths or avoid uncomfortable truths. But true alignment with divine will calls for a measure of discipline, a measure of listening grace, of listening to ourselves, because we've had that area of clarity within us now, because we're at peace with ourselves and being guided by something greater than ourselves. The Christic energy, the Christic principles, the I am presence, the soul's desire of wanting to do his or her best. And we are doing this by faith. Having a spiritual understanding from the Bible, other means or inspiration from books that you have read, you're grounded in something that allows you to walk by faith. It does require vigilance, But through that vigilance, it helps you understand your challenges, slow things down, reflect, look at the situation upon you, and ask your soul, your inner self, the wise part of you, what would be in alignment with the integrity of who I am and with the will of God in this situation. Now that means you've let go of the ego's perspective about this. What we're doing is we're moving the lower ego of desires and wants to a higher ego, which is the divine will. What is divine, God's ego here in this situation, you might say. It's a process. It requires listening and tweaking and changing and having a conversation with God, that wise part of you, to help to guide you and steer you in the right direction. So these are some of my thoughts about the will of God and using Sir Thomas More, which I think is a great example of how he lived his life. There's a YouTube you can go listen to on Sir Thomas, More, that gives you that flavor of his fervor and his unwavering commitment to God and walking a spiritual path. Remember that the will of God is not a rigid command, but a divine flow that invites us to live in alignment with our highest good, our highest purpose. And it's the key word of alignment. We have to begin to know when we're in alignment with the will of God and when we're outside of that will of God. Life experiences will show that to us. When there's that flow, as I mentioned before, and when there's things that are really rough, it's like traveling on a rugged road. They may be telling us stop, look, assess, and maybe you need to back out of that rocky road and move in a different direction. So when we are able to keep on embracing the love of God, the wisdom of God, and the glory of God in our life, and we continue to live with integrity and trusting the flow of life and embracing that we're evolving and we're growing to understanding God's will in our life, that allows our soul to continue to blossom, to continue to grow. We are continue to be in listening grace. And I'm going to do an episode in the future on inner listening and the helpfulness of being able to engage in that key quality of inner listening. Just as Sir Thomas More demonstrated integrity and in alignment with the will of God, I believe that the will of God, when we really start to contemplate it, think about it, read about it, watch movies on it, it allows us to develop the courage and the focus and an unwavering commitment to what is true, no matter the external pressure that one may face. What is true? And I am willing to do God's will because it is true. And it is one of the highest principles by which we can live our life by, because we're taking the time and the devotion to get aware of what does it mean to do the will of God. Something to think about. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining me for this episode on Mastering Life's Adventures, being your best self through soul evolution. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, I would be delighted if you would share this episode with others, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe to my Mastering Life's Adventures podcast. Look forward to your joining the next episode. Please leave any comments or suggestions you might have below. Bye for now.